Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kim Strassel and Alicia Finley here on Potomac Watch. And let's turn to presidential politics, which is now getting underway. I regret to have to say, but we're fated to cover this. And so we had another candidate getting into the race, major, minor, depending on your point of view. He's Vivek Ramaswamy, a 37-year-old biosciences entrepreneur and the author of Woke Inc. about the woke takeover of corporate America, and a contributor to the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. It's good to have midwife, another presidential candidate, here on our pages. Let's listen to Mr. Ramaswamy about why he's running.
We're in the middle of this national identity crisis where you ask most people my age, really any age, what does it mean to be American today? You get a blank stare in response, and I'm on a mission to deliver an answer to that question, because as much as I've been complaining about woke culture and identifying that problem, I think the way we solve it is by delivering an American national identity that is so powerful that it dilutes those woke agendas to irrelevance. And when I see a field forming where, yes, people are competing on their biographies, I think it'd be much better for the country for us to focus on the what and the why instead of obsessing over the question of the who. And that's what I hope to deliver to this field.
Kim, vintage Ramaswamy there, not a syllable out of place, rapid fire, very articulate, very smart, and I think an excellent messenger. The question is, he's 37 years old. He's never held elective office. He is not well known, even though he's appeared on Fox quite a bit, and CNBC, by the way, as well, given his business bona fides. But that has not necessarily built a national brand, so he's starting from a very low level of national recognition. What do you think about him as a candidate?
Yeah, he's going to have to work real hard to break in there and try to become nationally known. This is certainly one way to do it, is to get into a presidential race. But look, one thing he's really got going in his favor, you mentioned he's 37. The man has such energy. It is extraordinary. If you want to paint a contrast between the current occupant of the White House and youthful vigor, this is one person who can do it. He's really defined himself so far on our pages and on Fox as someone who wants to take up what he just articulated there. It's a lot about American national identity, cultural issues. He has waged a campaign against wokeism. He wrote that book, Woke Inc. He's been a very ardent supporter of free speech. He's been a very aggressive critic of ESG in capital markets and in corporations. He's got a line out there that he really rejects too, the whole climate religion that he says has shackled the U.S. and allowed China completely free to do what it wants to do. He's a big fan of re-embracing merit, which so am I. I'd love to hear candidates talk about that. I think the real question, though, Paul, is, these are things that certainly resonate with Americans, and they're definitely things that they want to hear from candidates. But is he going to be able to fill that out with the kind of policy agenda that also matter very much to political candidates, especially those for president? Where is he on taxes, regulation? What's he going to do about the border? What's his foreign policy views? Those are things that he's going to have to flesh out, and will be really central as to whether or not he manages to move from a sort of candidate on the side that has some interesting and unique perspectives, but into a tier that people seriously consider him as for president.
I think we've had in recent years a number of candidates who are, I would describe as vanity candidates, get in the race. They have really no chance. Marianne Williamson on the Democratic side, for example, Dennis Kucinich, I don't know how many times he ran for president. He was one. These people had no chance. They're trying to improve their brands. I would guess I would argue put Tulsi Gabbard even the last time in that camp, the former Hawaii Democratic Congresswoman. And Ramaswamy is going to have to persuade people that he's not just a vanity candidate, and people who consider him presumptuous for running at 37. He'll have a chance to do that, I think, but to get on the debate stage, he's going to have to show, I think, enough significant poll numbers and support to do so. One place where he won't get campaign contributions, Alicia, is from black BlackRock executives and Larry Fink, the CEO, because he's really gone after them on ESG investing, environment, social, and governance agenda. And he thinks investments that companies make should be based upon returns to shareholders, not a political agenda.
Right. So he actually last year founded this Strive Asset Management, which is intended to be a foil to BlackRock and some of the other asset managers, such as Fidelity, State Street, that have really kind of promoted this environmental social governance investing, in which climate, social issues like identity, politics, diversity on boardrooms are really prioritized in a lot of decisions in terms of the proxy ballots and other investing. So he's kind of pushed this and made this an issue among conservatives. And you've seen a lot of Republican AGs and even governors and state treasurers actually kind of respond to this and actually start raising questions with BlackRock and other asset managers. So I think he's actually had a pretty good contribution to our politics by raising these issues. And I'm not sure whether this is going to be an issue that's really going to resonate in a political campaign. It actually certainly did in some of the treasurers' races and controllers' races back in November, in which some Republicans actually ran on these issues and, down ballot contests. But I'm not sure whether he's going to be able to actually leverage this issue in itself in his presidential bid.
Just a factual point, Alicia. I think, isn't Vanguard the asset manager that's really been ESG focused more than Fidelity?
Well, Vanguard actually pulled out one of these big groups, climate-focused groups, just recently. So it's actually been trying to distance itself from this because it realizes the politics are very toxic.
But has Fidelity done this too?
Fidelity has also been involved in a lot of the climate.
All right, just wanted to make sure. All right, let's turn to Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. He has not declared for president yet, but he may, in fact, in the end. And this week he gave a big hint, traveling to Iowa, site of the first GOP caucuses in 2024. And he gave a speech that was more than his usual speech about his biography and personal story. Let's listen to a clip.
Fentanyl isn't the only poison flooding our countries. Politicians and the culture are getting communities hooked on the drug of victimhood and the narcotic of despair. They are addictive and they are lethal. People see themselves as victims with no hope, no accountability, and no skin in the game.
Kim, what's notable to you about Senator Scott's speech there in Iowa?
So what was most notable is kind of what you teased right there, is that this was different than some of his speeches he normally gives. He tends to have one speech, and it's very much about his own biography, which, by the way, is an inspiring biography, so that is useful for what it's worth. But this was a feistier Tim Scott. I kind of liked it. And he kind of maneuvered over and instead was talking about where Americans are at the moment, the gloom that is here, and then very much blaming it on Democratic policies. He had a line, he said, if you want a blueprint to ruin America, you'd keep doing exactly what Joe Biden has allowed the left to do these last 2 years. So this is a Tim Scott, I think, who wanted to show that if he runs for president, he's got what it takes to take on the Democratic Party. One thing I really liked about this speech too, Paul, was its optimism. That was a little bit of more of Tim Scott describing what's wrong, but he really projected optimism in this speech. He talked about how we need to have a new American sunrise, and he talked about how he'd love to see a Republican Party that could win 49 states and the popular vote. And I just think that's a really important addition if he gets into this field, because if you go back to 2016, Republican primary voters, they wanted something unconventional. They wanted someone who had the fight, so they nominated Donald Trump. And they got that, but at the cost of, when you elect a politician that's all about the fight, you can quite easily alienate 50% of the country. And that's kind of been what's been happening in politics since then. Biden was obviously narrowly elected too. And so Tim Scott is hinting that he'd run a campaign that would be aimed at inviting some more people in under the tent, speaking to all Americans. And I think that would be a useful addition.
Yeah, very important point, Kim. And Alicia, I'm going to give you the last word. But one of the things that is, I think, notable here is that everybody has been saying, most of the pros in politics are saying that, well, Tim Scott is every candidate's first choice for VP, but not giving him a lot of credit that he could be a candidate of influence influence by himself in the presidential race. But he's got an awful lot of money behind him. I think, in fact, after Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, he's probably the Republican candidate, and maybe Glenn Youngkin. He's probably the candidate who has the biggest war chest, potential war chest, because he has so many big donors behind him, and he's been raising money for a long time. People would like Tim Scott as a spokesman for the Republican Party. How likely do you think he's going to get in, Alicia, and what has he got to do to, relatively briefly here, to make a difference?
I think it's almost certain he's going to get in. One thing that people are attracted to him is his compelling biography, having a single mother and, basically his own story about the American dream and how he was able to succeed nonetheless, despite his background or difficult upbringing. And he also lends, diversity to the slate, or presidential slate. One reason I think he's discounted as an actual contender for the nomination is that he just actually hasn't been around for that long. He comes from South Carolina, so does Nikki Haley, but it's not a big state like Florida. He hasn't done anything big in Congress. He did champion a police reform last term that didn't end up actually going anywhere because the Democrats opposed certain aspects, and the progressives wanted to push for much more progressive law enforcement and federalizing a lot of local law enforcement functions. So in that, he did show he could be a leader, but he just hasn't actually been a very vocal member of Congress on a number of issues. And I think what he would need to do to get a lot of traction is to kind of step up to the plate a little more in Congress and to push certain issues or make certain things, police reform, for instance, elevate those in order to elevate his own standing.
All right. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Kim. And thank you all, as usual, for listening to our modest little podcast. We are most pleased that you join us every day here, and we're back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.